Hello everyone and welcome to our Let's Talk STEM STEMinar this evening. My name is Dr. Jared Carpenter and I'll be facilitating and co-hosting this event. I'm a lecturer in STEM education at Monash University and I'm be co-hosting with my colleague Lucas Johnson. I'll just throw to Lucas now to introduce himself and do our acknowledgement to country.
Thanks, Jared. My name's Lucas, and as you can see there, I'm the Research and Development Manager in STEM Education here at Monash University. So before we start tonight, I'd just like to pay our respects to the peoples of the Kulin Nations on whose traditional estates we meet today, to their ancestors and to the children we are educating into the future. I also acknowledge other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present.
Thanks, Lucas. And we'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you live streaming from all over. And we can see on the YouTube chat that people are commenting where they're watching from. And so that's fantastic. We're so thrilled to have you here. And also acknowledgement of our fantastic team that is behind the scenes running everything from marketing. We have Grace and Chantal, and from our tech support with Luke, Chris and Reggie. And then we also have some moderators on YouTube as well. So thank you to everyone that's taking part. So for tonight's event, now I'm sure many of you watching tonight have been in this situation over the last little while and have had to change things quite rapidly. And so I just want to share with you a bit of our purpose of what we're doing tonight. So it's split into two parts. And the first part is about our Let's Talk STEM videos that Lucas designed and created last year, and they've been released over these last few weeks. And we wanted to use these videos to get rich discussion going about STEM and what STEM education looks like in your schools. And so Lucas and I started planning this event last year, and we've had to obviously take it online. And so we've kept that purpose, and we're going to do that tonight. And our second part is our live Q&A session with our STEM experts. And the names are there on the screen at the moment, and we'll go back to those names later on as they jump on our live stream with us, and I'll introduce them properly. So if we were in the building and we had you with us, we would be trying to engage you by asking you questions and having groups work together in bits and pieces like that. However, as we're doing it in this way, we still want to engage you. We just have to be a little bit different. And so on the screen at the moment are three modes to get your engagement in tonight's STEMinar. So certainly using Twitter and anything that you want to tweet, using the Monash Education handle and Monash STEM hashtag, as well as the YouTube comments. And we have our moderators on there, some from STEM, who are going to encourage you to discuss things and encourage you certainly to ask questions. And as well as that, we have two Poll Everywhere events tonight to get your audience participation. So I'd just like to throw over to Lucas about some of our Monash resources that we have for STEM education. Lucas.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. So what you can see on the screen there is a snippet of our Monash STEM Education website that we've recently designed and launched. And everything that you see tonight through the videos and the teacher resources can be found on this website. It's also a great place to go to have a look at all the suite of resources that we've offered through the faculty throughout the years. So you can find our previous STEM talks. You can also find previous STEMinars like this evening's event, and a whole range of other STEM resources relating to research and policy as well. I'd also like to just bring your attention to, if you would like to take your understanding of STEM education to the next level, the faculty offers a graduate certificate in STEM education. It's a one-year part-time course designed for teachers to engage in while working full-time. And from all people that have taken part in this course that I've heard, it's a fantastic course to be a part of and create a really great network in STEM education with other students.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lucas. Now we're on to our first part of tonight's STEMinar, which is centered around these videos. And so our first video, the first episode of this series of 4, which have been released via Twitter and other social media, is really about getting this conversation started within your schools about STEM education, what STEM is going to look like for your school within your community. And it's an opportunity to see these STEM experts grapple with some of these difficult questions around what STEM education is. And so what we're going to do with you now is share a shortened version of that longer clip about STEM education. And so on the next slide, it'll go into a video that will play through YouTube.
What drives you crazy when it comes to STEM education?
When educators and when teachers or people who are experts in a certain field, they say, of course this, of course that. No, not of course. Assume people don't know anything, because then you're bringing them into that world, you're bringing them into that subject that you're teaching them.
Not everyone is engaged. You know, we see up to year 12 so few girls in particular engaging with the physical sciences, with mathematics. That's incredibly worrying, and it's down to the fact that it's not made interesting for everyone.
When teachers don't really want to give it a go because they think, oh, I don't really know that.
It's not rocket science.
It's not rocket science. No. If I can do it, anyone can.
Well, it is rocket science.
Yeah.
Okay, so as well as creating this, what we think is a fantastic set of video resources, we've also put together some suggested activities of how you might think about using these to promote discussion with teachers in your school. Again, these can be found on the STEM education website for Monash alongside the videos, the full-length videos. What you saw there was the 1-minute version of a 6-minute video. You can see here that we've suggested a couple of activities, and this first activity is really about getting a collective understanding of what STEM education might look like in your school, getting your teachers on board in getting their understanding of what they know about STEM education and so on. And then the second activity is the idea of coming up with a shared vision statement to ensure that STEM looks the same right across the school, and that teachers have an understanding of what a quality STEM education program might look like within your school. So tonight we're actually going to trial one of these activities, activity 2 there, and Jared's going to get your interaction. And as you mentioned earlier, this part of the evening might have been a buzz around the tables and having conversation going, but in current situation we can't get that. So we're going to go trial by technology and have a go at a poll everywhere.
Wonderful, thanks Lucas. So certainly, as Lucas said, the intention was to get people talking at their tables, at their groups, however we could, getting people talking, that's the main part of that engagement, and we obviously had to change it. So we're going to use Poll Everywhere. So this slide here has a website as well as a QR code, which I'll leave up for a little bit of time. And you can do it with any sort of device, opening a tab on your laptop or using your phone is absolutely fine. So I'll leave that up there for some time for you to be able to log in. And the question is, think about a word that you would want associated with your STEM program. It might be the STEM program that you're currently running. It might be one that you're wanting to build and develop. Think about what's the word you could associate or you want associated with that STEM program. And in a moment, we'll go to the next slide, which will make that active and make that live. And we'll be able to see those words pop up onto the screen. You can put in more than one word. As well, if you do miss the web address there, it is on the following slide, on the Poll Everywhere slide. So here is our poll with the web address at the top.
It's nice to see some contributions coming in already. We did expect a little bit of time coming in, so thank you to those people who are contributing. So people who think that STEM should be creative, should be inclusive, and we can already see there that a lot of people are putting in the word engaging. You know, we're really trying to engage our students in these STEM disciplines to think about how we can get them to really take control of their own learning. Inspiring is showing up really large there, which is fantastic to see as well, and exciting and role modelling as well. One of the key words that I'm noticing in there is transdisciplinary. How do we get teachers talking across disciplines and ensure that these STEM projects or our STEM curriculum manages to move across just those disciplinary areas? I do love the idea as well that that people are putting in challenging, because we want to make sure that our students are feeling challenged by these STEM projects. While they have to be engaging and exciting, it is really important that students are building those concepts at the same time. Great to see responses coming in thick and fast here too. Collaborative is a great word. We often hear about these 21st century skills where we talk about collaboration and communication and so on. So it is really important to get our students to build these skills through STEM education and STEM learning, and through what is mentioned here in an authentic way to solve problems. Now we might give you about 30 seconds more, I think, Jared, what do you reckon? And we might look at moving on to our next video. But thanks for all these amazing contributions. And as for those who aren't familiar with word clouds, you'll notice that the words that are larger are those ones that are coming in and are the key words. So you can see that people are really valuing the fact that these STEM things have to be engaging. They have to be inspiring for students and really help students to want to take up STEM as a future career, possibly.
Well, yes, thank you, everyone. Those responses were coming in thick and fast. It's so exciting to see such a diverse response for that question about what do you want associated with your STEM program. And as Lucas said, the way that it all works is the more times it gets pushed in, the bigger it is. So you can sort of see those words that are really taking up that screen there. And so people are really starting to think how they want their STEM program perceived.
Jared, there's a couple of words in here that stood out to me, which is actually a really nice segue into our next video. And those words were inclusion and diversity. So we're actually going to roll into the full version of video 2 tonight, because we think it's an important video to see. So many of you may have already seen this video, and for that you get a second chance at watching it. But for those people who haven't, this video is all about how we can make sure that our STEM curriculum is really inclusive by nature and allows all students to be part of it. So traditionally there seems to be a bit of a stereotype around who partakes in the disciplines involved in STEM education. But I think we're starting to see a shift and a movement towards more inclusion and more understanding about who STEM is for and how we can reach everyone within our community. So Jared, I reckon if we take off, so thank you again for the contribution to our poll everywhere there. We do ask you to keep that window open because there will be another opportunity to contribute in not too long. But we might actually go to the next slide now, Jared, and roll into our next video. What do you think?
The people who are designing and creating our world aren't represented by the people in our world. And so we're not getting the diversity of thought and the diversity of ideas into these professions. So I think it's important that we're talking to young people today about what STEM is and what engineering is, because if we don't, we're not going to get that diversity in the profession and we're not going to get people designing the world that we live in.
Research shows
girls are traditionally not as engaged in STEM. Who's at fault?
Blame. We get to blame someone.
Shall I begin?
Go ahead.
Our research is showing that it begins at the age of 4. We're seeing how girls who are entering into STEM learning practices with their educators are actually missing out on wonderful opportunities. And there are all these little moments, just small moments that happen to girls, such as not getting to the resources, being pushed away from the resources, having the resources taken out of their hands.
we as a society and as a culture in Australia are to blame for the lack of engagement with girls in STEM. It's really fascinating if you look at countries like Iran and some countries in the Middle East. They actually have 40% women engaged in STEM. 40% of their engineers are women. So it makes me wonder, what are we not doing right in Australia?
And we've all watched the show The Big Bang Theory on TV, and it's funny and hilarious and true in many ways, but I actually find myself laughing at it but also very uncomfortable with it, because it really perpetuates those science stereotypes. You know, scientists as people in lab coats with crazy hair and people who aren't actually engaged in the real world and very good socially. So I think that's really where we put girls off, in particular as they go into middle school years and their teenage years, and they're more interested in how their social group is interacting.
It's not a boy's career, it's not a girl's career, it's a career. Nobody's really at fault, but we allow these stereotypes to persist.
It's about knowing your students and finding what interests them, and that can be the hook to get them engaged in STEM education.
We've got to present science better, we've got to break down stereotypes, and we've got to show young women and young men female role models in science.
Okay, you're...
Go for it. Okay. Is STEM just for students who can ace their exams?
Whoa.
I like this question.
STEM is definitely not for people who can ace exams. I think STEM's about creativity, critical thinking, adaptability, and problem solving.
The skills in STEM, in terms of disciplinary skills, are still really important. So it's really important to have a solid maths and science technology background. But what STEM does is it offers students who haven't always been acing the exams in those areas an opportunity to show other strengths.
STEM is for everyone.
That's my catchline.
Yeah, I know, and I love STEM because everyone's equal when they come into it. There's no smart kid in STEM.
I actually think that STEM is for every student, every day, in every class.
So why is STEM so hard? Is it hard? Is that a misconception? I'm making questions up now.
I don't think it's hard. I think it's pitched the wrong way sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's got to engage the learner. I think if you can't do that, that's where you're going to find students drop off and aren't interested.
Okay. What role can STEM play in tackling disadvantage?
In all cases, education reduces inequality, and we know that. And inequality has been reduced by education, particularly education of girls.
STEM is it's quite an inclusive approach to education. I think it's kind of that idea of wide walls, low floor and high ceiling, where you can sort of come into something at any stage with any level of ability and then apply your level of ability to solving a problem. So if you have disadvantaged communities, students inside those communities solving problems that directly impact their community, I think is really important.
There's an interesting way that STEM tackles disadvantage in certain countries. So in Southeast Asia, in certain areas of the Middle East, in some societies, actually there are more girls than boys doing STEM subjects like engineering. And that's because they can get better paid jobs, and it's the only way out of a life where they have very few choices. So it's a real route, actually, a STEM career out of poverty.
STEM, while people may think it's a very new concept right now, it's been going on in Australia for over 65,000 years. It's this way of thinking of using the land and combining this interdisciplinary framework by using the stars that relate to the land, relates to the people. It's all interconnected, much like STEM. So I think it's very important to get more young Indigenous people into the STEM field and really encouraging them to go back to their roots and use that to help them in the STEM field.
What would be the collective noun for a group of STEM educators?
Well, it's not a murder.
I'm tempted to say gaggle, but no.
STEMeducators?
STEMinators.
Well, on Twitter you hear about STEMettes.
STEMettes? I've not heard of STEMettes before. I'm going to use that liberally.
Constellation?
Bomb diggity. It's one of my favourite words. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it means very awesome.
I can't add to that.
The bomb diggity STEMinators. I don't know what we're on here.
Teachers.
Can't think of it. Those are some interesting questions.
Enjoyed that video. We hope that you heard from there's some really great people who have great knowledge in diversity in STEM education. They're having a chat about why they think diversity is important, and even better to see the comments going on in that live chat on YouTube. We really encourage you to take part in that chat throughout the night and to even ask questions that you might like to ask of the panel later tonight. So knowing that many of these people who are in these videos will be available to answer some questions in our live Q&A. So if you do have any questions that pop into your mind as you go, please pop them on, and some of our moderators will be trying to draw those out to be used later on for our live Q&A. I'm now going to show you the suggested activity that comes with our professional learning resources for this video. And sometimes we don't really in schools give consideration to how inclusive our STEM curriculum might be. So does your STEM curriculum maybe just reach a certain kind of person? So a good opportunity, a good idea might be to grab an opportunity with the teachers in your school and have a bit of a conversation and consider the questions like, is there a gender bias in your STEM curriculum? Is it only targeted towards boys, or is it generally targeted towards girls based on how you're pitching your STEM program? And then also thinking about looking at traditional stereotypes in STEM education. How does your STEM program compare to those traditionally maybe masculine approaches to STEM education? And then start thinking about what are the steps that you can take. You know your students very well, and you know that you're how to include your students. So what are the steps that you can take to start to engage all students in your STEM curriculum? And if you think back to our poll everywhere only a few minutes ago, that a lot of people mentioned that students need to be excited by STEM education. They need to be engaged, and it needs to be authentic. And some of those things are really key steps towards engaging everyone from your school community in your STEM curriculum or STEM projects. We're now going to try another go at poll everywhere in a different way with Jared. So I'll throw it over to you, Jared.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks for that, Lucas. And those questions are really important for you to reflect on and think about your STEM program, whether you're running it, whether you're designing it, and also to find out from your students about how they feel in regards to diversity in your programs. And so as Lucas said, we're going to try poll everywhere again. This time, instead of doing it as a word cloud, we've done it as a scale for you to take some of those questions and really reflect and really think about the diversity of your own programs, to then rate how you feel your program caters to all of those students. So this time the poll everywhere is actually across 3 slides. And the first slide is just the question, essentially. And it has gone live now, so you can respond to it. It's the exact same web address as earlier, and it's still at the top of the screen. So you just need to select which response you feel to that question about how well does your STEM education program cater to the diversity of your students. And then on this next slide, which I'll click on now, this gives you that live feedback. And so here are all our responses coming in. For the last one, the word cloud, we had 128 responses. So thank you very much for engaging.
I'm just, Jared, as we're going through this, I'm seeing a couple of the comments coming through on YouTube where Paul's mentioned that their school has gone from a 25-to-1 ratio to a 1-to-1 ratio, which is fantastic, which shows that obviously a lot of work has gone in there, Paul, at your school to think about how you might be reaching everyone with your STEM program.
Yeah, great catch, Lucas. And then also following on from Mandy's comment that she's just put into the YouTube chat there about uncovering it, it can be quite a challenging endeavour. So such a variety of responses here coming in across our poll everywhere poll. And so it's interesting that no one selected E about we need to do a lot of work, but a lot of people feeling that they've got some ideas and some changes that they want to make into their program that they're currently in or they're thinking about developing.
And I want to also add to this that if we think about diversity, we don't want to just stick to gender as well, even though the video it does mention a lot about gender. We've got to think about cultural diversity and a whole range of the types of students you're trying to reach. So I know one of the questions was, is STEM education just for students who can ace their exams? So, I mean, traditionally maybe that might have been the case, but I think we're starting to see now that a lot of people's STEM programs are really engaging those students who aren't all about getting, high results in their marks and so on, that we can engage those critical thinkers and we can engage those creative students in different ways through our integrated STEM programs.
Yeah, I think so, Lucas. I think that's a really great comment about focusing on that engagement. And one of our colleagues from America, she often talks about equitable opportunities and equitable outcomes, which ties really nicely to this idea of diversity and thinking about diversity in that sort of general picture.
And it seems to be quite a nice spread across this poll here too, Jared. It seems that some people are recognising that they still do have a lot of work to do, and that is probably a bit of the case across the board sometimes. But it is also great to see the schools who have recognised this and feel that they do have a really diverse STEM curriculum.
That's right. And I would encourage people as well, as you're taking part in this activity, to use YouTube chat to share your views and your ideas, like Paul did earlier about what he had experienced. To encourage and just to get that rich discussion going in the YouTube comment section.
Thanks for your great contributions. We're hearing from Rachel, who's actually in the videos, is sharing some of her work that she's possibly talked about in terms of hooking girls into STEM in her school over in WA.
This is the fundamental basis of human knowledge and our entire society.
Start to spark the conversation with teachers in your school, and we hope that they're not necessarily something that everyone agrees with. You might have this conversation in your school, and you might get a range of different responses. So then it sort of opens that conversation in terms of getting people to have a bit of a debate as to why they think it is diverse or why it's not diverse, and so on.
Yeah, great comment, Lucas. And we do hope that you're able to take these questions away along with these videos to really use in your school to get those rich discussions going about STEM education, what you want it to look like, how it's going to run, how it's going to operate, and how you're thinking about that lens of diversity.
Okay, I think we might keep moving from that one, Jared.
Sure.
We're pretty excited tonight because tonight's the launch of our third video in this series. So the previous two videos have been released each Wednesday over the last 2 weeks, and there's been some great discussion and buzz going on about them already. So we're quite excited to give you, I guess, a bit of a first look, I hope, at this video. We will play the full-length video. And this one's started to target at the idea of diving in. So it's that idea of we've built a shared understanding of what STEM education can look like in our school. We've thought about who we can target. Now, how do I get started? So if you're unsure how you might get started with STEM in your school, maybe you might want to watch this video with the teachers from your school and start the conversation. Think about what you might be able to do, and then use what you see in this video as prompts for your teachers to start to set some steps in, or put steps in place to engage your students in STEM education. So the video covers ideas such as collaboration, and it also covers ideas such as engagement and assessment in STEM education. So I think we might throw it over now and play video 3.
This is the fundamental basis of human knowledge and our entire society. STEM education is really the bedrock of the way that we find out things about the world, and that's what makes us human.
Is STEM education the equivalent of an Instagram selfie? All Cloud emoji.
No brain, no, no important brain.
What's this? Clouds?
Cloud emoji and no graduation emoji.
All fluff and no substance. I'm guessing that's what the emojis mean.
I think sometimes STEM education can become a bit fluffy when you start to see those little STEM challenges or the little activities where you get these little packages now where here's all these STEM challenges, and that is a lot of fluff.
I think STEM can be perceived as a bit of a buzzword, and in some ways I'm okay with that because it means people are actually talking about it now.
When not done well, it can be. That's where it needs that rigour around it. It needs to be teaching clear academic concepts, but it also needs to be engaging and fun as well. So it's trying to find the balance between like a fun and engaging STEM project, but still allows for students to develop conceptual understandings in those areas.
So we'll go to the next question.
Next question, let's do it.
All right. So STEM education requires teachers to think, work and assess differently. How do you manage the chaos?
I don't know, I'm not a teacher and I'm very, very in awe and admiration of those who are.
Managing the chaos is actually then how do you actually get the system to recognise that's important. So teachers will be asked to assess in science, they'll be asked to assess in maths, and they'll be asked to do all of those things individually. What's important to assess is a really important question that this country doesn't actually address.
You know, how do you assess creativity? How do you assess problem solving? How do you assess critical thinking? So it's about being creative in the ways that we use, or in our assessment methods, I guess, as well.
Student-led learning and letting go of some of that teacher control can be hard. So I think the chaos can be there too, because it can be a noisy classroom and it can be a messy classroom. Beginning is the easy part, the planning.
The planning is the easy part, yes. So the chaos
comes further along.
Yeah, that's right. It is chaotic. Sometimes you're going to fail, and as a teacher, that can actually be quite a big leap of faith.
Someone said to me once about if it feels like it's chaos, then you're doing it right, because everyone should be working on something different. Your job as the teacher should be just to ask the right questions.
Okay. What's your advice to STEM curious teachers?
Oh, I love that word, STEM curious.
Be curious. Get in there, get your hands dirty. If you do it wrong, it doesn't matter.
There is no wrong in science.
That's right.
Because it's about trying things and finding out.
Yeah, get in the learning pit.
Curiosity is a great skill set to have in STEM, and my advice would be actually go out and talk to engineers and talk to people who do this as a job.
Don't need to have anything fancy to do STEM education. It doesn't need to be high tech. It's just more about the thinking and more about the process.
Highly recommend the idea of quick wins. What can you do straight away that you can help to get a little win this week, and how can you have a quick win for the next month or so? And that's how you start getting those baby steps and starting small to build something bigger. Yeah.
So even if you just change one thing, you know, it's a start. Have confidence in your ability.
Continue to be curious. Embrace the curiosity.
It's really not some big scary thing, and connect with other people that are already doing STEM education, whether it's online or in your community, because no idea really is ever unique. Someone's already done it. So you just grab ideas from other people and then you adapt.
Welcome back, everybody. And now we are very excited to shift our focus here onto the second part of this evening's STEMinar, where we are doing our panel question and answer session with our panel who featured in those 3 videos that you've just seen this evening. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce some of our panelists for tonight. So I'm going to start with Professor Lisa Harvey-Smith, who is an astrophysicist and the Australian Government Women in STEM Ambassador. Felicity Fury, who's an engineer and the founder of Power of Engineering. Lucas Johnson, who has been co-hosting with me tonight, who's the Research and Development Manager in STEM Education at Monash University. Professor Marilyn Flair, who's the Laureate Professor and the Director of the Conceptual Play Lab at Monash University. Rachel Lear, who's a Deputy Principal and a Science and Digital Technology Leader, and also the founder of the hashtag Primary STEM Chat on Twitter on Thursday nights, and Danny Somerville, who is an instructional leader and a primary STEM teacher, and also Professor Deb Corrigan, who is the Director of Monash Education Futures, who will be joining us shortly. And what we're going to do for this segment of question and answers with our panel is Lucas and I have been through these videos and gleaned some questions from these videos to put forward to our panelists. So I'd like to invite our panelists to respond to these questions. So Felicity, if we could start with you. In the first episode, you mentioned that it's important to shift people's perception of science, technology, engineering, and maths. What role do teachers have in changing this perception, and how can they support this shift?
Thanks so much for having me tonight. And yeah, I think it's a really important role that teachers do play in shifting the perceptions in STEM. I know for me growing up, there were no engineers in my family. My dad did journalism. My mum had studied art. So I had no idea what the word engineering meant. And it was only because of my year 12 physics teacher that I even considered engineering. So it's a hugely important role that teachers play. And really that one conversation that I had with him had me go and become an engineer. So I think there's so much that teachers can do in supporting the shift. It's about showing the kinds of jobs that STEM professionals actually do and how they actually use maths to solve problems and help people, and really focusing on the difference that young people can make in these kinds of careers will help shift those perceptions for students. And there's so many great resources out there, so many great role models that teachers can draw on to share with their students to start that perception shift.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Felicity, for that really detailed response. I'd just like to invite, if anyone else from our panel wants to add to anything that Felicity's just said for a moment or so, if anyone would like to.
Can I add to that one?
Of course, Rachel.
I think as a teacher that we can model having that STEM mindset as well, and particularly as a female, and we've in the videos we talked about women in STEM and girls in STEM. So I think even as a female teacher in the STEM area, so we can model that we are, having that whole world-wide problem-solving view about things, and modelling being a thinker and a problem solver and just making mistakes as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much for that addition. And we've seen lots of questions popping up on the YouTube chat as well. So we really want to make sure we get to that portion of the evening where our audience members are able to feed those questions to our wonderful panel. So I'm going to move on to our second question. And Marilyn, in the second episode, you mentioned that your research shows girls as young as 4 being disadvantaged when it comes to STEM. What suggestions do you have for our early year educators to ensure equity during this critical time in our children's development?
Thanks, Jared, for a fantastic question, and hello to everyone that's participating tonight and to the panel. From the point of view of young children, and this goes, of course, into the early years of primary school as well, is that first of all understanding the problem. And we know from a lot of research that there are many aspects that are quite significant to the divergence of STEM and gender experiences that children have, the gendered experiences of STEM that children have. And there, as mentioned in some of the videos as well, the rush to the resources and the girls left standing without the equipment to participate. Girls we've seen in preschool settings, in block corners where they position themselves as helpers to the boys who are doing the construction by passing over the blocks. These are sort of some of the kinds of examples that come up in the research. And so different ways that we see girls and boys interacting with materials that could be engineer related, STEM more specifically, more broadly. But the net result of those kinds of experiences where girls can't get into some of the spaces and don't have access to the resources has resulted in girls essentially playing with materials in different kinds of ways because they're not getting access to them. And what the research is showing is that girls will tend to build, for instance, and construct in engineering ways for a purpose. So they'll work with materials to make something so they can play with it. Whilst boys, the research is tending to suggest, will make things, construct things, build things, but then knock it down and then start all over again. So there is more of a focus on the materials, whilst the girls is more focused on building a narrative around the use of the materials. So there's a social purpose. So what we know once, and there's much more to that, but just in brief, what can we do about it? What are the kinds of things that make a difference in the early years? Our research in our conceptual play labs already starting to show some really important differences, and we have an evidence-based model which begins with storying and a social problem that needs engineering, for instance, or STEM solutions to be solved. And the storying with the role play and the play builds a really beautiful narrative. But it's more than that. It's in this imaginary play world. Children and girls in particular become really enthusiastic and engaged, and participate in a lot of engineering activities, lots of mathematics, lots of science in these particular spaces. And our research is showing that when the teachers are with the children in the imaginary situation, then many of the kinds of challenges that I alluded to, the kind of problems about girls getting access, just disappear because the teachers are there with them together, building or making or constructing or critically thinking about things. And this is quite significant. And it's important from the point of view that the research has shown further down the track that when children have these, girls in particular, don't get access to STEM and don't see they have a place in the STEM learning agenda that's happening, this builds over time and they feel that STEM's not for them. And so we're feeling very optimistic that our model of practice is making a huge difference for girls in particular to begin the pipeline and do things in new ways. So we're pretty excited.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marilyn. And seeing some of the comments coming in on YouTube, people are asking you for links to some of your work from the Conceptual Play Lab. I also just noticed the most recent one there from David Jones talking about how important this is because he's got his own kids, and that's how I feel as well. My daughter turns 4 in a couple of months. So I think that's really important to think about that idea of STEM and equity starting so early and ensuring that we are considering those. So our third question for our panel tonight is for Professor Lisa Harvey-Smith. Lisa, in the second episode, you made a point that your issue with STEM education is that not everyone is engaged. In your role of ambassador for girls in STEM, what strategies can you suggest to support the engagement of girls in this area?
Well, thanks, Jared. A lot of teachers are doing great things, and there's so many ways that educators can actually help to include everyone in the classroom, because remembering boys and girls is not a binary in gender in particular. It's not a binary in interest and behaviour necessarily. So there's a whole spectrum of people out there that need to be engaged. So collaborative pedagogy is a really strong way to engage a lot of people in STEM classrooms, and that has to be managed quite carefully because, as Marilyn alluded to before, different people have different approaches to, say, practical building projects. Some people will naturally gravitate to design, for example. Others will gravitate to grabbing building blocks and smashing them together. So, everyone has those different personality elements. And certainly we do see with gender that tends to send boys down the line of immediately grabbing and doing, and girls tend to more err on the side, on average, of planning and executing projects for a purpose. So those different styles have to be sort of managed carefully in the classroom and taken into account as well. One of the other things is evaluation. So how do you test, certainly with older children, how do you test their learning, their understanding? And if you do that through a range of different measures, not just exams, but discussions, project work and collaborative project work, you can actually start to tease out a number of competencies that students have in the classroom and not just account for the traditionally academic measures of success. but for other people as well. Certainly as an astrophysicist myself, I always did better in project work than individual work, and a lot of people would be the opposite. So it depends how you're tested. Thinking about testing a fish on its ability to ride a bicycle. So projects based on social and environmental concerns are really attractive to young girls in particular, because they understand why it's important, why STEM relates to real life and how it can benefit society. And that's a really fantastic way to, I guess, motivate students and to allow them to see and design a project in a way that has a social impact and benefit that is attractive to them. So that's a really good way. The last thing I wanted to mention was female role models in the classroom. So a diversity of role models shown in textbooks, which is very, very hard to do. Attractive resources, things like posters, Women in STEM posters that you can get from the Girls in STEM toolkit, and other organisations. The Australian Maths Trust as well has some, so that people can see in your classroom that it wasn't just Einstein and Newton and Galileo and the old dead men who have achieved things in science, but it is a contemporary, exciting and diverse way of looking at the world and solving problems.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa, for that really insightful response. And I'd just like to open to our panel, if anyone else would like to add on their thoughts about that question about supporting girls in this engagement in STEM education.
I just wanted to add something there, if it's okay.
Of course.
I think it's really important, if you're at a school where your main STEM educators are male, that you are looking for those examples as well. You might not have that female role model in your school for STEM, but we can certainly show those different public figures, such as Professor Lisa Harvey-Smith, as well as famous STEM experts from history like Dr. Grace Hopper. There's plenty of great stories out there that we can share to engage those female students, and they're equally engaging across the spectrum of genders.
Wonderful. Thank you for that addition, Dan. And now moving on to Rachel, that you've done this incredible job of bringing such a large group of primary STEM educators together on Thursdays using the primary STEM chat hashtag. And I noticed that in the YouTube comments, a lot of people were recognizing each other from that and talking about that. And so the question that we're posing to you is, why do you think having a strong professional learning community is important for teachers of STEM?
Thanks, Jared, and thanks everyone for being here and all of our primary STEM chat crew that I've already seen over on YouTube. I'm glad this question was asked, because I'm pretty passionate about professional learning networks, and particularly in Twitter. It's said that you can learn something from everyone you meet, and I think that's so true in a place like Twitter. And building my strong professional learning network there has allowed me to become a better educator, I believe, and particularly in the area of STEM, where there's so many new developments and things taking place in STEM education, it's a perfect place to learn from others about what's happening, not just here in Australia, but around the world. So I would say, if asked, that it was one of the better things I'd ever done in relation to my professional development as a teacher, was joining Twitter and building that network. So some of the things that it allows me to do is, like we do on Thursday nights with Primary STEM Chat, to join a chat where you are specifically focusing on a certain topic. Each week with Primary STEM Chat, we may focus on a different area of STEM. At the moment, we have a lot of remote learning focus, but it could be on gamification, it might be on early childhood STEM, it might be using stories for STEM. So you can tap into something that's of particular interest to you. Also, just scrolling through your Twitter feed, you can learn what others are doing in their classrooms, in their schools, even connecting not just with educators, but STEM professionals, and seeing what's happening out in STEM fields. And I found so many new products and resources and books that are being released through Twitter, and finding out about things like tonight's opportunity conferences, professional learning opportunities, and then also linking from being in an online professional network to connecting with those people in real life. So I've been afforded the opportunity to meet some of the people that I've connected with on Twitter in life, and it's also given me the opportunity to present at conferences and participate in podcasts and webinars. So really, if there's been a great idea that I've had, it's never really been mine. It's been borrowed or lifted from Twitter and what other people have generously shared. And it also gives you the chance to ask questions. So I'm stuck at something, I put a question out on Twitter and my professional learning network comes with help. So there's just so many positive things about it. So if you aren't on Twitter, I recommend it highly, and I'd love to see more of you come along on Thursday nights for Primary STEM Chat.
Thanks so much for that, Rachel. And Twitter is very new to me. Lucas convinced me at the end of last year that I should join for all of the reasons that you've just listed. So I joined in November and then sort of started taking it up in sort of February. And there's so much information on there, and it is so good to be able to see what's happening around the world in so many different aspects of STEM and education in a broader sense. And I'm just conscious of the time, and I can see lots of questions coming through on YouTube. And I know many of the audience members will be really excited to put their questions to our wonderful panel. So Deb, I'm going to move on to a question for you. And so in the third video, you touched on this idea about failure for teachers. So our question, it's in two parts, is why do you think teachers tend to be risk averse? And what are the conditions that are required to allow teachers the autonomy to take more pedagogical risks?
Thanks, Jared. I think failure is incredibly important, but for teachers, it's a bit of a dilemma because, you know, as a science person, I mean, and I've had a background in technology as well. Failure is fundamentally important to the learning that I can't tell you how many times I've failed at science pracs or designing something. But, you know, it's a really fundamental opportunity to sort of say, so what went wrong? How can I actually, you know, learn from that? But when you actually then are a teacher, you sort of say, well, the whole failure notion has so many connotations to it that are negative. So success and failure in terms of education needs a real rethink. I think failure in terms of exploring learning is a real positive. You have to convince a lot of people of that, though. And I think that's probably part of the dilemma for teachers, is because failure often has this assessment connotation to it that says, you know, if you're a failure, then you're not doing well enough. And it's linked with accountability, I suppose. You know, if you're failing at doing your job, or if somebody fails an assessment task, that's very problematic. So we need to think of failure in very different ways. And so the second part of the question is, what are the conditions required for the teachers to have autonomy to take pedagogical risks? I've just been reading something about why teachers teach. And I think largely it's because they develop a professional identity and they want to be in a professional space where they can actually teach in the ways that they believe are really important and making a difference. And that's really about teacher autonomy. And so the balance becomes really about, how do you do what you really believe is important and meet all of the requirements of the system at the same time? And so I think that balance gets out of whack. And so sometimes you forget that in actual fact, the accountability really needs to be to the students, and the accountability system comes second. So when I'm engaged in STEM activities, I really think the thing for me that becomes fundamentally important, and where I'm really happy to fail, because I'll learn something from it as a teacher, but as a learner, is the fact that listen to the learning that's going on in a STEM experience. And for me, that's the fundamentally important thing, rather than have I actually collected enough data for what the school wants, because that will follow. So I think baby steps, but, you know, really say, what is important to me as a teacher? Where are my passions? Am I prepared to fail, and what can I learn from it? Are the really important ideas here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Deb, for that detailed response about the idea of changing the connotation and what we think about failure and what it means in education and what it means for teachers, and more importantly, what it means for learning. And Lucas, the question I'm going to pose to you is that you discuss, following on from Deb, this idea about rethinking the way that we assess students. and why is this important when it comes to STEM education?
Thanks, Jared. And I think this actually follows on really nicely from what Deb was talking about in terms of what is important to assess and so on. And we run some STEM professional learning courses here at Monash for in-service teachers. And the key things that they like to know when they come here is, how do I plan for STEM learning? But more importantly, how do I assess this kind of learning? You know, when you start to move across disciplines and when you start to integrate a whole range of skills, it becomes really tricky in terms of how do you assess this. And sometimes our traditional assessment methods just don't hold up to the approach that is STEM learning. So I think more than just thinking of the way we assess students, it's also thinking about what we want to assess. So we have seen the introduction of capabilities curriculum, which asks us to have students engaging in critical and creative and intercultural thinking. And while we have to assess that, we also want to sit back and think, well, with critical or creative thinking, do we want to actually put boundaries around creativity for our students? And my understanding of creative thinking is that different to the teacher next door to me. And so how do we start to think about how we assess those things and putting, you know, if we start to think of assessing, are we limiting? The other challenge is if students are starting to apply their knowledge across disciplines. Now, my background is in primary education, and the luxury we have as primary teachers is that we teach across those disciplines. But then as you reach into secondary education, it takes a lot of work between teachers to collaborate and to start thinking, you know, across faculties, how can we get students engaged in these STEM projects? And also, how can I assess my own students here? So I guess the key thing is that collaboration, talking to other teachers about assessment, and then sitting back and thinking, just like Deb said, what do we value? What is important here? What are we trying to achieve here? And do we have to assess everything we're getting our students to take part in?
Wonderful, thanks, Lucas. And I can see so many clear links between what everyone's saying, and like you're just relating there to Deb's talk about what are we valuing when we're thinking about teaching and learning, and then also about looking to other teachers about what they're doing, which ties really nice to what Rachel was saying about using Twitter for that sort of interaction. And so our last question for our panel member, Danny, here is, in the third episode, Danny, you talk about getting in the learning pit. What are some of the challenges you faced when you first implemented STEM education at your school, and how did you overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, so I've kind of only been in the STEM space for 3 years, and initially I was a classroom teacher. I was teaching a grade 1 class, and so there was a few challenges that I had to go through, and one of the first challenges for me was letting go of that love of teaching literacy to young students. But thankfully I was able to bring that with me, and a lot of what I was doing in my STEM program, or my STEAM program at my school, related back to a lot of literacy, which worked out really well for us. Probably the biggest challenge though was that we didn't really have a STEM program. So I kind of went in and had to create something that encompassed our entire junior school. And then I had to think about, well, what does that look like, and what curriculum does my school want me to cover? You know, am I assessing science, digital technologies? Am I assessing maths? And so I had to base my program around that. And, you know, interestingly enough, a lot of our STEM program didn't include explicit teaching of science. It was a lot of incidental science because the classroom teachers were tasked with assessing that. So, and being in a team teaching environment as well, I had to think about, well, you know, my team teaching partner is a science expert and I'm not, so how can we meet somewhere in the middle? And so there was all of that to really consider. And then of course it came down to, well, what are the resources that we have? How am I going to get them? What budget have I got? You know, I don't want to go out and buy all these amazing robots and start using them. I want to find a proper purpose for them so that I can introduce them for, you know, from 5-year-olds right up to 10-year-olds. But as far as overcoming all the challenges, a lot of it was about sitting back and reflecting. And I'm really lucky that I work with someone closely who we're very open and honest with each other. So we're able to adjust things as we go. And initially when I took over our STEM program, it was a semester-based one. So we had 2 shots of doing the same program within a year. So second half of the year, we always got better. And then by the second year of doing it, you know, things were a lot more refined and working a lot better. like Rachel said before as well, getting involved in Twitter actually got me through that entire process of starting that STEM program. Just asking all my peers there, my extended professional learning network was a real godsend for me. And like Rachel said before as well, you know, all the ideas that I used, they weren't necessarily my ideas. They came from other people, or they were a mix and mash of lots of different ideas. So I was really thankful for that. And really just that whole experimenting and failing and showing the kids that that's okay. You know, okay, guys, this didn't work. You know, next time we'll try something different. And that was really positive for us in developing that program.
And also jump in there, Jared, just quickly. Of course. In my experience, I think sometimes teachers are a bit tentative to give it a start. And if you're someone in your school who's already integrating STEM into your curriculum, it's a great idea to invite them into your classroom to see how it looks in action. I think sometimes if teachers can see that it is possible, it can be done. Sometimes it's chaotic and that's okay, and you deal with that. Then it actually helps them to think about how they might be able to add it to their own practices.
Wonderful. Thanks for that addition, Lucas. And thank you so much, Dan, for sharing your experiences about doing the STEM and the STEAM work at your school. Now we're on to a very exciting part of our evening, where we are asking for our audience questions to put forward to our panel. And so we've seen questions coming in throughout the evening, and Chantal has also just asked people to put questions in there. And so I'd like to invite Grace and Chantal from our marketing team to be the voice of our participants this evening and put those questions forward to our wonderful panel.
All right, so I've got a question here surrounding the idea of growing a professional learning network in STEM. So this question comes from Christine, and she's asking for some advice on how to get/allow others in the community to feel connected and competent in STEM initiatives.
Can I jump in on that one?
Absolutely, Rachel. I was going to suggest you. I was waiting to see whose microphone.
Oh, sorry, I was a bit slow getting there. As I mentioned before, Twitter has been a great tool for me in connecting with others. And I think a lot of people fear Twitter and are a bit daunted by it. So I just want to assure people that at the beginning it may seem overwhelming, but if you just slowly work your way into Twitter, and maybe you just sit and watch a chat and then you follow the people that participated in that chat, that will connect you with other people that are interested in the same area of learning as you. So for example, in primary STEM chat, it will connect you with other primary educators. So you don't need to go full on into it. But that, as Danny has also said, that really has been the greatest way for me to connect with other like-minded people. And when you go to conferences or participate in events like this, connecting with those people afterwards as well. So finding all those opportunities just to build that network of people that are passionate about STEM like you are is a great way to start.
And just adding on to that, Rachel, as well, is it really does open up doors for new opportunities. I think it's safe to say both you and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for our involvement on Twitter, and we wouldn't know Lucas. And, you know, like you said before, presenting at different conferences and different webinars, and just getting to be connected with so many different varied educators around the world has really opened up doors that, for me personally, I would never have expected. If you asked me 5 years ago, I wouldn't have expected it at all.
100% agree with that. Exactly. Yeah. That's the reason why I'm here tonight. It was Twitter.
Can I add to that? Sorry, Deb. Oh. Can I add to that and just say briefly that Twitter has also been a valuable tool for me as well. And just a very quick story. One of the people that I met on Twitter is from Samoa, and she's been doing some amazing things. And through the kinds of work that she's been doing for young children in STEM, she's joined our Facebook, which is a closed site for anyone can join, of course, but it's closed. But it's for educators interested in sharing their ideas and posting things up. And that's been a fantastic tool for people sharing their practices and building confidence and having discussions about STEM and the best way forward for supporting the learning of younger children in the early years of school and in the years prior to school. Over to you, Deb.
So I just want to add to what Marilyn just said. I think one of the really important things is, I'm not a devotee of Twitter, I've got to say, but I think one of the important things is you need to gain confidence, but you also need to know that you can learn with others. So even if you actually use the site of your local community, you'll find a lot of capital in your local community, so long as you're not actually thinking that you've got all the answers up front. So all of the questions that you have are often the questions that other people have. And so you can actually build a community that's not necessarily just nested in education, although it does come out just naturally. It is also embedded in the local community, and you can learn together. And so wherever you are, and even if you're not connected on the internet, you can actually, so long as you actually are prepared to take the risk, you can actually engage in building that confidence together. And I think that's a really important point.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for giving your insightful response to that question. I'd like to invite Grace or Chantal now to put another audience question to us.
I've got another question, Jared. It's about the Australian curriculum is actually quite flexible. So we've got someone just commenting about that. Do you think teachers will be able to move away from traditional topics to deliver STEM projects, and what help do they need?
Lucas, would you like to respond to that question first?
Yeah, sure. So I guess there's two ways to think about curriculum in the sense of intended curriculum versus enacted curriculum. So what you see in that curriculum document is the intended curriculum, but then your enacted curriculum is how it looks in your classroom. And that's where teachers as professionals have a bit of autonomy to think about how they can ensure that they're getting those skills and understandings across to their students. So I think teachers who can be creative and think about how they engage their students, they don't necessarily have to use the curriculum as a checklist. Really, they need to be thinking of the curriculum as a bit of a guide to help you think about how you might engage students and what students need to know at that year level, I guess.
Can I jump in there as well and just add to that?
Of course.
Yeah, I think it's a really great opportunity that the curriculum is so flexible, and in the work that we've done to engage students in STEM, we've really focused on those real world examples, and I think the real world examples are fantastic because they often include all of those elements of STEM, and once you start exploring some of those real world opportunities, even different things like fashion design or taking your band on a world tour and figuring out their set list, you might use statistics to figure that out. So once you start to bring in those real world examples, I think there's lots of STEM opportunities that are in there. So then, linking back to the curriculum can be really interesting once you're starting from that real world perspective. So I'd also invite teachers to think about it from that perspective as well, rather than starting with those nuts and bolts of the curriculum and leading from there.
And can I add to that too? Thank you. That if we stop thinking about STEM as a separate subject and thinking about it as a mindset that we put to learning in any area of our curriculum and problem solving authentic, meaningful problems to our students, then we stop thinking about it as just science, technology, engineering and maths, and a way of approaching problems maybe even in HASS or in art or in phys ed or any of our learning areas. So I think it comes down to what we define as STEM education and how that looks in our school.
I'll also jump in there again. I think if you can start with a really great problem and start thinking problem first and then finding where the curriculum links are, it's amazing what areas of the curriculum lend themselves to that kind of problem. So it's amazing when you start to think about where you can apply your science understanding and build science skills and maths and technology and add the engineering level as well. So I think starting with a really good problem is a good starting point.
I think even with the problem as well there, Lucas, is sometimes it's good when we don't actually give the students the problem. Especially for younger learners, we can give suggestions or clues to where we want the problem to go. We might have foresight there. But one of the joys of linking stories to young children is that you can use the problems from those stories, and it sort of leads you down that path of, what are we going to do to try and solve the problem for this character? And then the students are coming up with all of those ideas themselves.
Can I just add one thing about curriculum? It's the, as Lucas said, it's the intentions. It's the intentions that you're supposed to do. It's not a checklist. So as a teacher, I suppose I am probably like sort of the play worlds that Marilyn does, for example, and the fact that it's the experience that is important. And as a professional teacher, you know, I can make the links to the curriculum. I don't have to teach, you know, content standard 3.3 or whatever. In fact, I can actually do that in a very holistic way, which is the way kids learn anyway. So I think my role as a professional here is to actually look for the links in the curriculum rather than make the curriculum drive the experiences that I engender in my learning.
And I'd like to add to what Deb's saying too, because in the Play Worlds model, it's exactly as Deb is describing, because the environment changes, and what I want to add to that is to say that we sometimes have to think about how we can change exactly what's available to us in our environment. So by looking at the outdoor area, by looking inside the classroom or in early learning centres, we can start to rethink how we use those resources to create these inquiries and use imagination and storying, and to really support the sense of wonder and curiosity, which then we as educators, as teachers, can actually overlay with some serious intentional teaching in a way that makes the concepts serve the children's interests and needs and play and curiosities. So rather than it's content to be learned as a fact, it's actually about setting that mind, that beautiful, rich, exciting mind, alight with a desire to actually have to want to gobble down the concepts in order to keep going with what they're doing. And I think for me, that's the passion of STEM that we can bring. And it's what we want to take forward, I feel.
And it happens at the senior level as well. I mean, you know, I'm an ex-chemistry and biology teacher, and I was a biochemist by training. So I've had the opportunity to teach chemistry and biology at year 12 level in Victoria at the same time. And once you get that really rare opportunity, the opportunities that open up to you are fantastic. So, you know, you can actually integrate things in far different ways than sticking to the dot points in the curriculum. And I know the exam sits at the end, but in actual fact, the enrichment of the learning that goes on for the students is boundless, really, if you actually are open to taking those sorts of risks in very considered ways.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone, for your detailed responses. It's so interesting to see how you build off each other's responses as well. And Chantal and Grace, do we have another audience question?
Yeah, so we've got a question from Scott here, who's asking, how do you balance explicit teaching and students learning through projects with STEM?
I just wanted to also interrupt and say that Scott is one of our alumni as well, who's just entered the working force also. So nice to hear from you, Scott.
Can I jump in on this one?
Absolutely.
Now, our school, so the school that I've been teaching at for the last 10 years is a school that bases our curriculum on explicit instruction across the school. So there was some expectation that in my science classroom and where I was teaching science and digital tech together, that there would be that component of explicit instruction. So we would start off our lessons with the content that we needed or the explicit teaching of the skills we needed, and then that would allow the students to apply that to problem solving later on. So often over the course of a term, we'd start off with that explicit instruction, and then we would learn to apply those things, if that makes sense. So it's certainly not one or the other. I don't think it has to be that it's all inquiry-based learning in STEM. I think there is a place for us to learn concepts, to learn skills, and then apply them.
Can I add to that too, Rachel, by saying that in the early years, particularly when inquiries emerged during the storing processes around the play worlds that we have with the younger children, that the explicit teaching happens in an embedded way. So, for instance, in the story of Robin Hood, going back in time to role play and experience the storying of the castle with the dungeon, and the problem arises about how do you get the moat up, and therefore, you know, there are these kinds of new learnings that can happen, that when children go back in time and interview the castle engineer, they gain some knowledge about certain things, which can be the teacher role playing being the castle engineer, but also it can be going back into real time again and searching and finding information and researching about how pulleys work and so on, in order to do some design work, some engineering design work for a social problem that might have arisen. And then taking that information back in time again during the role play, so that children can research and prepare reports for the castle engineer back in time. So you can actually be moving in and out of imaginary worlds, inquiries and so on. But the explicit teaching is actually there to always support the children to enrich the experience. So I think there are many ways in. So front loading them or embedding it at particular times with a particular purpose also works too.
And just to build on that, Marilyn, I think when it comes down to the teachers being really intentional at the planning phase of STEM units. So for example, if you come up with a problem and you think this might lend itself to this kind of explicit teaching. So really thinking about the explicit teaching that can come with that STEM project. So you can sort of teach that on the side to help students build their understandings in the areas that they're exploring throughout that project.
Absolutely.
Can I just add, one of the things that we need to be far better at as teachers is to be explicit about what we're doing. And so, you know, I often hear, and Lisa will probably like this, you know, we often hear that engineering is missing from the curriculum. Well, it's not missing from the curriculum. We do it, but we're just not quite, we're not explicit about it. And so I suppose the explicit teaching and being explicit about what you're doing and the purposes for why you're doing it is something that we really must attend to as teachers, because it's those sorts of things that make the connections for kids when they hear it somewhere else. And I think we have to get a lot better at that.
It reminds me, Deb, of some research that was done that interviewed 6-year-olds and 9-year-olds, asking them about what is an engineer. And the children all said, well, an engineer is someone who drives a train, you know, or fixes things. So there was no conception of what engineering is. So it's exactly as you're saying, you can be engaging children in engineering activities, but never actually tell them that's what they're doing. So therefore they don't have a sense of engineering and all the different professions within engineering, per se. One of the things we noticed in our research was that by actually calling, instead of the traditional areas that you see in an early childhood setting, like the book corner and the home corner and the construction kit, actually by having an engineering space and naming it as an engineering space, means that you can actually talk about the head engineer, you can talk about all of the concepts around how engineers work in teams and so on. And that makes it really very clear what's going on, and being very explicit about the kind of learning that you're introducing. But it's about thinking differently about how we interact with children and how we create those spaces. So I totally agree with you, Deb. We need to make visible the work of that sits behind our planning to children as well.
And I was also going to add about the technology aspect of STEM learning, which I'm very passionate about technology being used authentically and meaningfully, but also with that, you need to actually know how to use the tool, whether it's a robot or an app or whatever the technology is, the students need to learn how to use it. So there's no shame in explicitly learning and teaching about how to use some of the tools that will then free you up to show what you know in wonderful ways. So we can explicitly learn how to use those tools to our best advantage.
Can I make the plug for technology is just not digital technology? You know, a ruler and a pencil are a really good fundamental technological tool.
And we still need to know how to use them properly too.
Indeed.
Wonderful. I'd just like to invite one final question from either Grace or Chantal.
Yes, we do have one specific to Lisa. So we've got a question, Lisa. Do you think reducing the choice of Year 12 subjects and making maths compulsory in Year 12 would engage more girls in STEM? And that's coming from Kim.
No, making maths more interesting and relevant will engage more girls in STEM. So we need a solution that is genuinely tackling the problem, which is that most mathematical teaching books, resources are boring as hell, make you want to jump out of a window. And that's not blaming teachers, that's blaming the entire system and history of the way we've taught mathematics and the way we've taught subjects in silos. So I think if you go to any bookshop and you pick up a maths book and it's just full of equations, there's no context, most people will find that boring. I find that boring, but it's all about desperately trying to take out that traditional learning of mathematics. And you do have to do that. You do have to do your arithmetic exercises. You do have to practice differentiation, whatever it is. But you also first need to explain why you're doing it. And the why is something that's often neglected. So not forcing more carrot, less stick, I would say, would be more effective, in my view. I will put my hands up and say I've never been a classroom teacher, and I love what all of you do, and it's great to see so many of you engaged, and thank you so much for being here this evening and engaging with all of us. But yeah, I think definitely carrot, no stick.
Wonderful. Would anyone like to add a final comment onto Lisa's comment there about maths education?
I've had an interesting change in what I have to teach this year. So up until last year, I was foundation through to year 4, and this year I'm primarily teaching year 8 Digitech. And, you know, that's a real shock for me as a teacher because there's such a difference in the engagement levels of students in not just digital technologies, but designer technologies and, you know, even media arts and things like that. And I just wonder, what's the point where it changes for these kids that they become disengaged? Is it the high school environment? Because I find in primary school, every student is engaged. There's no one that's not. And that's just something that, you know, I'm grappling with wonderings about that now, is how do we, what's that point that we need to reel these kids in, and, you know, something changes somewhere in that year 7, 8 period where kids just lose that engagement and it only just seems to get worse as they get older. I guess that's another question in itself. So
wonderful, thanks Dan. And finishing on a question like that to get everyone thinking and considering, you know, all these rich ideas that we've all talked about tonight, I think is a really nice way to end our STEMinar tonight. Before closing off, I'd just like to offer a huge thanks to our panel for joining us tonight and responding to everybody's questions, and to Lucas as well for designing and making those videos and doing all the editing and coordinating everything for tonight. I think it's just been a really wonderful evening. And massive thank you to our marketing team with Grace and Chantal, who have coordinated everything behind the scenes, and to our tech team with Luke, Reggie and Chris, and also to our online moderators on YouTube. And I have YouTube open on another computer and I can just see the comments flying through. So thanks so much to Mandy Berry, Beck Cooper, to Karen, to Jen, to Sarika and Kathy for taking that role and responding to everybody's comments.